Hello everybody, my name is LZ Manetta, and today I am here to bring you another Baldur's Gate 3 guide. Today, I am bringing you my top 10 spells to use for your Arcane Trickster rogues and Eldritch Knight fighters. I feel like these two subclasses are slept on a lot because people often think of damage spells for these classes, the big issue being that we want to have either strength or dexterity for weapon attacks, constitution for hit points, and then intelligence for at best mediocre spellcasting. However, the best spells to take for these classes come from spells that don't require your intelligence score to be high. If you are worried about your intelligence score in case you still want to cast some offensive spells, then there is a magical item that you can get early on called the Warped Headband of Intellect, which sets the character's intelligence score to 17 if it isn't already higher. You can get this from the trio of ogres in the Blighted Village, and it drops from Lump the Enlightened. To my knowledge, you have to kill them in order to get the headpiece. Convincing them to fight for you does not cause it to drop. One more thing to note, Arcane Tricksters and Eldritch Knights both take spells from the Wizard spell list. However, Arcane Tricksters must choose 2 spells from the Illusion or Enchantment schools, and Eldritch Knights must choose spells from the Abjuration or Evocation schools. Each class only chooses 1 wizard spell from any school, right at level 3. However, I'm not sure if it's intended, but as of the making of this video, when you level up with these subclasses, you can swap out one of those spells from the restricted spell list and change it out with any spell from the wizard spell list that you can cast. For example, if you're an Arcane Trickster, let's say you took Charm Person and Sleep as your spells from the restricted spell list, and then Mage Armor as your universal spell at level 3. When you get to level 4, you get 1 more spell from your restricted spell list, maybe Disguise Self, then you can swap out either Charm Person or Sleep from any first level spell off the wizard spell list. Let's just say you swap Charm Person for Longstrider. You might not be able to grab most of the spells on this list unless you use this method, so make sure you take advantage of it. With that out of the way, let's get on to this week's video. To start the list, we have the Shatter spell. Shatter is a 2nd level evocation spell that does 3d6 thunder damage in a 3 meter radius sphere if the target fails a constitution saving throw. The spell still does half damage to those who succeed the save. Shatter is on this list because it is going to be the best spell these classes can use if they want to deal just damage. However, since Shatter targets an enemy's constitution score, and many enemies are going to succeed on the save against the spell, especially towards the end of the game, and oftentimes a rogue or fighter will deal more damage if they had just used their action to attack with their weapons. Still, this spell is a good spell to use in order to finish off low health enemies from a long distance, and is arguably better for rogues because it gives them a means to damage multiple targets in the same turn, something rogues are typically pretty bad at unless they multiclass. At the number 9 spot, we have Featherfall. Featherfall is a 1st level transmutation spell that applies a buff to the target, giving them and nearby allies immunity to fall damage. A key change to this spell between the tabletop and Baldur's Gate 3 is that it takes a bonus action to cast rather than a reaction, and the spell doesn't end the moment the creature touches the ground. In BG3, Featherfall is also a ritual spell, meaning that when cast out of combat, it doesn't use a spell slot. It also doesn't require concentration, so it's a very good spell to pre-buff yourself with before the fight starts. A lot of fights in BG3 make great use of verticality, so allowing a character to freely jump from very high to very low without taking damage is incredibly good. Many of the feature spells on this list will follow the same concept, as rogues and fighters don't need spells to help them do damage, and they get much more use out of spells that don't require good intelligence score to use effectively, and spells that allow them to better maneuver the battlefield. In the number 8 spot, we have Expeditious Retreat. Expeditious Retreat is a 1st level transmutation spell that takes a bonus action to cast and requires concentration. The spell can only be cast on yourself and immediately gives you the benefits of the dash action, and it allows the caster to dash as a bonus action on each of their turns until the spell ends. The spell also lasts until the next long rest, so you can cast this spell right after a long rest and get its benefits without having to cast it in combat. The spell is much better on fighters than it is on rogues, as rogues already get a class feature that allows them to dash as a bonus action with cunning action. For fighters, this allows them to double their movement speed while also freeing up their action to make weapon attacks. The only downside is that it requires concentration, but as a fighter, you should have a good constitution score, and fighters also gain proficiency in constitution saving throws, so the chances of you losing concentration on the spell are actually pretty low. Sleep takes the number 7 spot on this list because of its incredible utility and ease of use. Sleep is a 1st level enchantment spell that takes an action to cast. When you cast a spell, you target a number of creatures for the spell to affect. Each time you select a creature, you subtract their current hit points from a total pool of hit points that the spell provides. The spell can affect a number of creatures whose current hit points do not exceed 24. Those targets are then put to sleep for 2 turns. There isn't a saving throw against the spell, and when upcast you get an extra 8 hit points to target per spell level above first. Sleeping is an incredible condition to put on a target. An enemy that is sleeping has their turn skipped, attacks against them have advantage, and attacks made within 3 meters of them always hit and are always critical hits. The second feature is really good. Its best use case scenario is against enemies that your fighter or rogue can't hit this turn but are already low health, so that by your next turn those enemies are guaranteed to die. The only bad part about the spell is that sleeping can be removed if an ally shoves them. Since shoving is a bonus action, an enemy could shove a sleeping creature and still hit you, so it's best to target isolated enemies or a small group of enemies that will also all go to sleep. This spell is a lot better early in the game than later, but it is still worth having into Act 2 and Act 3, as you will still find some use for it, but it's really good Act 1, especially when traversing through the Goblin camp. At number 6, we have Thunderwave. Thunderwave is a first level evocation spell that deals 2d8 thunder damage in a 5 meter cube in front of you. The spell requires the targets to make a Constitution saving throw, taking full damage and being knocked away by roughly 9 meters if they fail, and only taking half damage and suffering no knockback if they succeed. The spell has the same issue as Shatter, in that it targets Constitution and requires you to have a good spell save DC, but the real power with the spell, and why it is higher than Shatter, is that Thunderwave knocks enemies backwards. This spell pushes all enemies the same distance regardless of their weight. Since so many fights have cliffs or ledges, you could potentially send a whole group of enemies down a cavern and finish off a fight with only a single first level spell. Even if you don't auto-win a fight, pushing enemies off of a ledge might make them take half of their health and fall damage, and then they have to move back up towards you if they want to hit you again. You could also use this to knock enemies back into more powerful spells cast by your primary spellcasters, spells like Wall of Fire or Hunger of Hadar. This spell gives both rogues and fighters so much utility that it's a must-pick spell for these classes. In the number 5 spot, we have the spell Jump. Jump requires an action to cast, lasts for 10 rounds, and triples a creature's jumping distance. Jump is also a ritual spell, so it doesn't cost a spell slot when used out of combat, making it a great pre-combat buff. This spell is good for rogues, as it will actually allow them to have a good jumping distance, but the spell is incredibly strong on a strength-based fighter. Jumping distance is determined by strength, so a high-strength fighter with triple jumping distance will jump miles across the battlefield, essentially turning your bonus action jump into a pseudo-teleport. This also lets you jump onto super high elevations to engage ranged enemies in melee. Since it's an action to cast, if you must cast this spell in combat, then you are still able to jump on the same turn you cast a spell, but this spell is best used before combat. It also does not require concentration, so it's essentially guaranteed to last for the entire fight. Coming in number 4, we have Longstrider. Longstrider is a very simple spell. It's a first level transmutation spell that takes an action to cast and increases your target's movement speed by 3 meters. Longstrider is a ritual spell, and the buff lasts until a long rest, no concentration required. What makes this spell so amazing is that it can be cast on allies. So, when you hit level 3 with your fighter or rogue and get the spell, your entire party always has an extra 3 meters of movement speed. Most enemies only have a 9 meter movement speed, so this lets your ranged companions outrun your enemies, and your melee companions can catch up to them faster. Since it's a ritual spell, it also doesn't cost a spell slot when you use it out of combat, so you don't have to worry about burning through all of your spell slots just to buff up the party. Coming in third place is the Blur spell. Blur is a second level illusion spell that takes an action to cast and requires your concentration. When you cast Blur, you get a buff that makes all attack rolls against you have disadvantage, with a caveat that creatures with blind sight or that can see through illusions are not affected. This spell is great for both fighters and rogues, and is another spell that fighters benefit from a lot more. In BG3, it is pretty easy to get your AC up to 20 or 21 with heavy armor, which already makes you really hard to hit. On top of that, giving enemies disadvantage on attacks against you means that you're usually only going to maybe get hit by the big boss enemies. Trash mobs and fights essentially have zero chance of hitting you. This won't help you against area of effect attacks or abilities that target saving throws, however, so you still need to watch out for those spells like Fireball. Even though it's a concentration spell, and you're probably a melee character, it won't matter too much because enemies are going to be hitting you so little that you almost never have to make concentration checks. Even rogues can stack AC towards the end of the game, and in my opinion, this should be your go-to concentration spell during boss fights with these classes. At number 2, we have Misty Step. Remember the jump spell and how I said it was so good because it was basically a pseudo-teleport? Well, what's better than a pseudo teleport? An actual teleport. Misty Step is a second level conjuration spell that requires a bonus action to cast and teleports you to a place you can see within 18 meters of you. This is one of the best spells in the game just because of its ease of use. You don't have to worry about ceilings or weird map geometry getting in the way of your jump. So long as your target location is within your line of sight, you can teleport to that location. Since it also doesn't use any of your actual movement, unlike jumping, you can still move after you teleport. You can use it in combat to get right into the thick of the fight, or use it to get out of dodge should a fight start to go south. Out of combat, it can be used to get to hard to reach places that maybe you otherwise wouldn't want to walk through. This spell is better on rogues and fighters because rogues tend to have lower strength scores, so their jumping distance isn't as far, and it's often better to use this spell to leave a group of enemies rather than get into a group. And since rogues aren't as tanky as fighters, it only makes sense that they will use this spell better. That being said, grab this spell on your Eldritch Knights as well, you won't regret it. The last and final spell on this list, and the best spell for your Arcane Trickster or Eldritch Knight, is going to be the Shield spell. Shield is a first level abjuration spell that is cast as a reaction after getting hit with an attack. When cast, this spell increases your armor class by 5 until the start of your next turn. And if casting the spell would cause an attack to otherwise miss you, then you take no damage from that attack. You also become immune to the magic missile spell. This spell is amazing and will help you prevent so much damage. Getting a plus 5 AC bonus is the same as reducing an enemy's chance to hit you by 25%. This spell becomes extremely powerful when combined with our number 3 spell, Blur. An Eldritch Knight could get upwards of 25 or 26 AC with enemies attacking at disadvantage. You will basically never be getting hit with this combination of spells. One thing to note, this spell becomes a lot worse if you have the Karmic Dice feature turned on. In case you are unaware, Karmic Dice is a system turned on by default that makes success and loss streaks for dice rolls less common. If you miss an attack, the game artificially increases your chance to hit an attack until you do hit. But this rule also applies to enemies, so the Blur plus Shield combo becomes less potent due to the game artificially increasing an enemy's chance to hit you. Depending on how high your AC is, you might actually get crit more often with this combo, since eventually your AC will become so high that some enemies have to roll a critical hit in order to hit you. You can turn this feature off in the gameplay tab of the options menu. And there you have it, folks. My top 10 spells for Arcane Tricksters and Eldritch Knights. I hope you guys all enjoyed the video. Make sure you guys like and subscribe, and feel free to leave a comment letting me know what spells I missed or how you would have changed up the list. Have a good day, and I'll catch you next week with another Baldur's Gate 3 guide.